Hey everyone, I hope you're doing great and following the 3 H's of the channel. In this video, it's all about stories from Mexico. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, pull up a stump with me and let's jump into it. Thank you for watching. My maternal grandmother tells this story only sometimes, and she still gets visibly uncomfortable while talking about it. So, back in the late 1950s, in Mexico City, Grandma's older sister, Maria, is getting married. Maria is going to hand-deliver all the invitations. She asks Grandma to come with her. The last stop is a house that is divided into small apartments. Maria's friend lives at this place, and the two get to chatting. It's about 8 p.m. by this point. It's dark outside. Maria is standing in the doorway with her back to the street, talking to her friend. Suddenly, her friend freezes, and her eyes go wide. Her friend's little brother happens to walk by the door and to look outside, and he screams and runs to the back of the apartment. Her friend stutters and finally says, "El Diablo." Maria and my grandma turn around and almost faint. In the middle of the street, behind them, is what she can only describe as a demon. It's well over 6 feet tall, blackish, and has snake-like skin. There are no facial features, aside from shrouded red eyes, and a horn coming out of its face, which curves back behind its head. Maria and Grandma run into the apartment. Their friend locks the door behind them. They start crying and praying for help. Tenants hear the screams and ask what happened. They decide to get some guns and hunt the demon down. They search through the town, but never find anything. The friend's brother died a week later in his sleep. My grandma always thought that the demon came for his soul. I have a story about something that happened to my friend from Mexico. He lived in Telea del Castro, Oaxaca, Mexico. He was walking home from orchestra practice one day, which is about 20 minutes across the field. He has to pass beside a small cliff along the way. As he's passing the cliff, he hears a noise, like somebody is running up the cliff. This is next to impossible. It's much too steep. Suddenly, a dog comes up over the side of the cliff and stops in front of my friend. The dog opens his mouth and smiles at him. My friend is terrified, but suddenly, he's frozen. He can't move or scream or do anything. The dog stands up on 2 legs and starts to do these weird, methodical movements in front of him while laughing like a human. And then the dog drops back down on 4 legs and runs back over the side of the cliff. My friend runs back to his house, but doesn't tell anyone. The next day, he gets extremely sick. The doctors are stumped. He tells my friend's family, "The sickness isn't like anything I've ever seen in my career." His family decides to take him to a shaman, and the shaman tells them that my friend is about to die, and that he had been hexed by a witch who carried a grudge against my friend's father. The other witch was a very powerful shaman who could transform into animals, usually dogs. My friend has never told this story to me directly. He always seemed to hate the paranormal. It was his first cousin, who was there during all of this, who told me about the event. I have a story about La Llorona, the ghost of a woman who roams the streets looking for her children. This happened 14 years ago in Mexico City. I was in the middle of my university career, so I used to sleep very late at night. One night, I went to bed at around 2:30 a.m. I was just starting to get sleepy when I heard a long, sad moan in the distance. I immediately woke up as the moans started to cry, "Oh, my children." I froze, thinking, is this actually happening right now? But that voice, to this day, I can never forget what it sounded like. It was sad and terrifying at the same time. It was a woman's voice, no doubt about that, but at the same time, it sounded ethereal, disjointed. I have never heard anything like that since. I just lay there, face down, motionless, with my eyes wide open, sweating. I waited there until daybreak. I couldn't sleep properly for a week after that, but I never heard it again. This was also quite near to a children's cemetery, which I'm pretty sure had something to do with it. But why only that night? When I was about 13 years old, my dad took me camping a couple of miles from a cabin in a Mexican forest. It was getting pretty late, and we put some sand on the campfire. At around 2 a.m., I wake up to something outside the camp. The wind blows so hard that it lights the campfire back up. My dad tells me to go back to sleep, but I can see him, and he looks very nervous. I turn around, and I see a shadow from a humanoid by the campfire. I sit there, wide-eyed, staring at it. We are the only people in 2 miles or more. This thing spends almost 2 hours lurking around and making weird noises. By daybreak, we pack up everything and tell everyone why we came back so early, but nobody believes us. We mention it to the forest ranger, and he goes pale and says that he's glad that we are safe. The next year, I was hiking with my friend 8 kilometers from the first story. I found a small graveyard for the town. Suddenly, there was silence. No birds, no wind, just the fall of the branches from the trees. We kept walking, and we could hear a woman talking. We didn't really pay any attention to it. It could be another hiker. But it gets late and begins to rain heavily, so we come back to the cabin. We close every door because it's Mexico. We wake up the next morning. Every door and window in the house is wide open. Nothing is missing, but there's muddy, bare footprints tracking all around the house. Not only that, they come over to our beds and walk around. Next time, we sleep with a gun next to us. An acquaintance of mine long ago told me about his encounter with a witch or a shapeshifter. There have been a series of thefts recently in the town where my friend lived. Somebody was going around stealing livestock, mostly pigs. So he and some neighbors got together one night to see if they could catch the thief, when they saw a very strange sight. From their lookout spot, they could just make out a small country road that led to the next town. Walking down this little road was a lone donkey with 2 pigs tied on its back. This was obviously very suspicious, and the group of young guys left their lookout spot to catch the donkey and recover the stolen pigs. But when they got near it, the donkey spoke to them. "Please, let me be," it said. Not expecting this, the group got a little more than scared and reacted violently. Some grabbed large sticks to beat the animal with, others threw stones at it. The donkey began to beg, "Please stop, don't hurt me anymore, you are good boys, let me go home." They ignored its pleas and assured the donkey that they intended to kill him. So the donkey identified himself as a man from the next town, and even revealed his name. My friend didn't want to tell me the man's name, though. "If you let me go, I will invite you all to eat at my home tomorrow." By this point, the event is obviously much too surreal for them, so they just accept the offer. He says, "Okay, you can come around noon." The donkey gave them directions, and the group of guys let it go. The next day, they all met up and followed the donkey's directions, which led them to a house in the next town. Arriving there, they were greeted by a man who looked just like any other person in town. He was very hospitable and served them all plates of food. He thanked them for not blowing his cover. The man said that he was a butcher, and the reason for his stealing the pigs, he wanted his business to prosper. I think my friends said that they attempted to blackmail him at first, but in the end, they decided to keep silent, but not before getting some answers. He said he was a Nahual. A Nahual is a shapeshifter in Mexican stories. The curious young men asked him how he was able to shapeshift. He said, "In order to transform, I must be in a room that is entirely empty except for some jars that contain the bones of the animal that I wish to change into." There was no more details after that. He said that he learned this skill from somebody, but he wouldn't say who or when. There were others, too. Some of them used this power to kidnap young girls, or do whatever somebody will pay them enough to do. I have more stories, too. This one was from a tiny little poor village in Mexico back in the days of the Revolution. The town's cows, goats, and chickens keep disappearing. Most people believe it's bandits taking off with livestock at night. My great-grandfather is getting sick of losing his animals. He hangs out by the corral all night so he can catch the bandits and beat their asses. Finally, he hears rustling in the bushes. A huge anaconda-sized snake slithers out of the bushes and grabs one of the goats. The old man runs up to it and starts hacking the shit out of it with a machete. The snake obviously nopes out of there. The next day, an old man who was suspected of being a brujo was found dead, with machete wounds all over his body. After this, they had no more lost animals. Too bad I didn't inherit his balls. And my mom told us a story of when my grandmother had an encounter with a duende. My grandma had recently given birth to one of my many, many uncles. She's in her living room relaxing. The front door is open a little bit just to let a breeze in. My baby uncle is bundled up sleeping on the couch. Grandma has her eyes closed. She hears something. She opens her eyes to see this little blue person going to snatch my baby uncle. Grandma reaches over and grabs him out of the duende's arms and runs to the bedroom screaming and locks the door. The duende keeps banging on it, yelling that it wants my uncle. And another one. A group of friends decides to go out into the country. One of them has a little house out there. They spend the day talking, telling stories, and just having a good time. At around 4 p.m., they decide that they want to explore the countryside. As they're walking, one of them says that they feel like someone is throwing pebbles at them. Nobody knows what he's talking about. They don't hear anyone throwing anything. He insists that somebody is throwing rocks at him, and he feels like he's being hit by tiny stones. Suddenly, they all heard high-pitched laughter coming from all around them. The laughter got louder and louder and became deafening. They hurry back to the house, and the laughter dies down. But the guy who was getting hit by the pebbles claimed that he didn't hear anything, but they wondered if he was just too scared to admit it. Suddenly, it sounds like someone is throwing rocks at the house. They go outside. There's nothing touching the house, but they can hear the stones hitting the walls and bouncing off. They all leave the house and go to their cars and just drive out of there. But one of the cars gets a flat. It's around 7 p.m. by this point and getting dark. As we're changing the tire, we see a bunch of eyes, glowing like cat eyes, staring at us from the darker areas. We change the tire and we leave ASAP. We get home and I find a little rock in my pocket. And I have another story. I knew a man who used to go around rural towns teaching Mayan-speaking people to talk Spanish. During his travels, he heard stories of stuff. He told me a lot about those stories. Here goes one of them. A man is living in a farm in a large house. A small barn is just outside. One day, he hears a strange sound coming from the barn, but at the moment he enters, it's dead silent. It happens every day for 2 weeks, until the man gets tired of it. He grabs an old rifle. All it needed was a bayonet, and it looked just like one of those British Empire standard rifles. He sits on a window of his house, looking at the barn, waiting. He waits and waits. Suddenly, he sees a huge puma with bright red eyes walk silently toward the barn. The puma sniffs at it, and just as he's about to pee on it, he shoots at it until his ammunition runs out. As he's reloading, he sees that the animal is no longer there. He runs downstairs and finds his front door wide open. There's a trail of blood going through his entire house. It ends at the room he was just in, but there's no puma there. He checks the barn. There's a fresh hole in the side of it. All the animals inside are dead. There was no commotion or freaking out. They all died silently. And I have one more about an owl witch connection. My friend was teaching Spanish in Yucatan. He was living in a town that actually had streetlights, and one day he was waiting for a ride after dark. He was standing on the side of a deserted road, streetlights overhead. It was dead silent out. He looks up. A white owl is passing directly over him. In Mexico, this is generally a bad omen, an omen of death. It's said that if you insult the owl, the curse is lifted. My friend hurls obscenities at the owl. I'll let you picture what they are. He figures that'll do. 30 minutes pass. He's still waiting. He looks around, wondering where his ride is. Then he sees a street light down the road go out, and then the one next to it goes out. One by one, they're all going out, almost like the darkness is approaching him. Pretty soon, all the lights are off, except for the one right above him. He starts hearing breathing. Even though the light above him is on, it begins to look like it's growing dimmer and dimmer. Suddenly, all the streetlights come back on at once. My friend's ride shows up to pick him up. He gets in and leaves. There's apparently a brujo that can make the lights go out like that. He does it when he wants to steal stuff from other towns, but he usually doesn't hurt people. People say that his presence attracts the attention of other things, though. They say his power drags evil things to him. And this last one is one I find very unsettling in my one opinion. In this time, Nuevo Leon was all countryside. My grandmother was a girl, maybe 7 years old. Her baby sister, her father, herself, and her mother, my great-grandmother, all lived together in a little house in the middle of nowhere. One day, the sun was setting, and my grandmother was playing near a tree when my great-grandmother was washing clothes. My grandmother climbed the tree and found a huge bird, almost as large as she was in size. She looked at it, surprised for a moment, before it spoke to her. It said, "Look out, you." My grandmother was shocked, and the only thing she could respond with was, What? The bird said nothing more. My grandmother, stunned, climbed down from the tree, but did not take her eyes off the bird. The bird watched her the whole way down as well. My great-grandmother then called my grandmother and told her to get into the house because it was getting dark. My grandmother did so, but she didn't tell her anything about what had happened, thinking that maybe she imagined everything. At that time, my great-grandfather always arrived very late from work, so there was only 3 of them in the house: my grandmother, great-grandmother, and, like I said, my grandmother's baby sister, only an infant at the time. They also had a dog who slept outside. Well, night fell, and they went to sleep, waiting on my great-grandfather. They slept on the floor, and my great-grandmother put the baby in between herself and my grandmother. After a while, they woke up because the dog was barking. It sounded like there was a scuffle with another animal. The animal was the bird that my grandmother had seen in the tree. My great-grandmother took a machete and began to strike at the bird. As she opened the door, the bird charged inside. It seemed to be trying to reach the baby, and it kept moving toward it despite the machete blows. After a fierce struggle, my great-grandmother managed to get it out of the house. It flew toward the tree where my grandmother had first seen it and began to laugh out loud. My great-grandmother stayed in the doorframe in case the bird tried to get in again, but it didn't. Hours later, my great-grandfather finally arrived. My grandmother and great-grandmother told him what happened. He pulled out his revolver and with a piece of red flannel went out to the tree where they had seen the bird. He tied the flannel around the tree and began to recite the rosary backwards. After a long time, the bird fell to the ground, and my great-grandfather emptied 5 shots of his revolver into it and returned to the house. When the bird had fallen, it looked dry, like a husk. The next morning, they found that the bird's carcass was not there, but there were some feathers on the ground and nothing else. Some time later, they found out that on a nearby property, a couple who had just had their baby woke up in the middle of the night and only found the skin of their child. No blood, no flesh, and no bones, just the skin. So, what did you think of those? Let me know which one was your favorite one down in the comments. Do you have one of your own? I have an email in the description below that you can send them to if you'd like to. Also, is a PayPal and a Patreon down there as well, if you would like to donate to the channel that way. And, of course, if there's a topic that you'd like to see a video on, then leave a suggestion down in the comments. And I hope that you all have a good week, and that the next week is better than this one, because you never know what someone's going through. And with that, I will see you in the next one. Thank you all for pulling up a stump, and thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.